Everyone thinks the last stand at Masada was about military victory. They were wrong. It was 73 CE, and I've read the accounts myself, not the triumphant versions, but the logbooks, the witness testimonies, the letters that survived. What happened on that plateau in Judea wasn't a battle. It was a choice. 1,000 people, men, women, children, decided that certain things mattered more than breathing, and that decision still echoes through how we think about freedom today. Let me set the stage. Rome had crushed the Jewish rebellion in Jerusalem. The temple was ash. Thousands were crucified. But one fortress held out. Masada, built by Herod the Great on a rock mesa 400 feet above the Dead Sea. It was nearly impregnable. And inside those walls, around 960 men, women, and children, the Sicarii, they were called, refused to surrender. Here's what they didn't know yet. Rome wasn't going to starve them out. Rome was going to build something unprecedented. A general named Silver arrived with 15,000 soldiers, and they started constructing a siege ramp, a massive earthen slope built by thousands of men over months, inching closer to the fortress walls. Every day, the defenders watched it grow. They could see their deadline approaching, literally rising from the desert floor. The philosophical weight of this hits different when you understand the timeline. They watched for months. They had time to think about what was coming. They weren't ambushed into heroism. They were given the space to choose it, which makes the choice infinitely heavier. And that's where Stoicism enters, not as a historical accident, but as a framework for living when you know the outcome. Eleazar ben Yair was their leader. I've encountered his words in translation, speeches preserved by the historian Josephus. And what strikes me, sitting with those texts, is how clearly Eleazar separated what he could control from what he couldn't. Rome's legions, inevitable. The ramp's completion, inevitable. Slavery or death at Roman hands, functionally certain. But one thing remained entirely his, how they would face it. The ramp kept rising. Weeks turned into months, and Eleazar gathered his people not to inspire them with false hope, but to reframe what freedom actually meant. He didn't tell them they'd win. He told them something harder, that their freedom was never Rome's to take. Rome could take their bodies, their property, their lives, but they could choose how they died. They could choose what their deaths meant. This isn't comfortable philosophy. This is the kind that only makes sense when comfort is already gone. The Stoics, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, they all return to this same truth. The only freedom that can never be taken is the freedom of your will, your judgment, your response. Rome could destroy Masada, but Masada's people could deny Rome the satisfaction of their surrender. April 74 CE. The ramp was finished. Roman battering rams hammered the gates, and what happened next is the part everyone knows but misunderstands. They drew lots. Families chose death together, not because they were suicidal, because they decided that dignity, autonomy, and refusal were worth more than survival on Rome's terms. I've stood in places where history happened, and there's always a weight to it. But what strikes me about Masada, what separates it from other tragic last stands, is that it wasn't desperation. It was philosophy made flesh. They had options. They could have surrendered. Rome was offering terms, but they chose something they valued more, the integrity of their choice. Here's what this teaches us about modern life, and I say this carefully because I'm not equating your Tuesday with a siege. But the principle holds. How many times do we surrender our autonomy, our judgment, our actual freedom, because we're afraid of what we might lose? We compromise ourselves for approval, for comfort, for the illusion of security that Rome promised. The Stoic response isn't recklessness, it's clarity. It's understanding that certain things, your integrity, your values, your ability to choose, are worth protecting even when protecting them costs you, even when the cost is high. Especially then, because once you surrender those, you've already lost everything that made you worth saving. Masada teaches us that freedom isn't the absence of constraint. It's the presence of choice, even when all the choices are hard, even when they all cost something. The people on that plateau weren't free from Rome's power, but they were free from Rome's control of their will, and that distinction matters more than we usually admit. What happened after the ramp breached the walls is less important than what happened before. Because the real siege wasn't external, it was internal. It was the siege of doubt, of fear, of the voice that whispers surrender. And they held that fortress. They chose their terms. That's the story that survives. I think about Masada when I'm facing something I can't control, a deadline I can't move, a loss I can't prevent, a change I can't stop. And I ask myself, what can I control here? My effort, my honesty, my refusal to compromise on what matters. That's not Pollyanna. That's the hard-won wisdom of people who face the worst and refuse to surrender their agency. The Stoics didn't preach invulnerability. Epictetus was enslaved and beaten. Marcus Aurelius lost nearly all his children. They knew loss intimately. What they taught was this: loss is inevitable. Suffering is inevitable. But despair, the surrender of your will, that's optional. That's the one thing Rome could never force. So when you're overwhelmed by complexity, by forces larger than yourself, by odds that don't favor you, remember Masada. Not as a romantic story, as a practical demonstration that your freedom doesn't depend on winning. It depends on deciding what you'll stand for and then standing. Everything else is just logistics. That's the siege of Masada, not a military victory, a philosophical one. And the only way to honor it is to understand that the same choice is available to you right now in whatever fortress you're defending. The ramp is always being built. The question is, what will you refuse to surrender? Subscribe for essays on Stoicism, freedom, and the philosophy that actually works when everything falls apart.